There is a moment that arrives for every man who has walked away from something real, not the dramatic moment of departure, not the clean, sharp edge of a decision made in anger or fear, or the particular cowardice that dresses itself in the language of self-preservation, but the quieter, slower, more devastating moment that comes afterward, sometimes weeks later, sometimes months, when the noise of the leaving has finally settled and what remains in the silence is the undeniable weight of what was lost. That moment has arrived for him, and if you have felt something shift in the atmosphere between you recently, something you cannot name but cannot dismiss, you are not inventing it. You are sensing the reverberations of a man confronting, perhaps for the first time with full honesty, the magnitude of what he chose to walk away from. Jordan Peterson has said that the successful man is not the one who avoids suffering, but the one who finds something worth suffering for. And this man is suffering now in a way he did not anticipate and cannot easily manage, because the suffering is not coming from outside him, but from within, from the slowly clarifying recognition that what he had with you was the kind of thing worth suffering for, worth being afraid for, worth being imperfect and uncertain and genuinely vulnerable for, and that he understood that too late, or understood it and ran from it anyway, which in some ways is worse. He told himself a story when he left. Men are extraordinarily good at this, at constructing narratives that make their retreats look like decisions, that dress their fear in the respectable clothing of practical reasoning, that allow them to walk away from something they cannot handle without ever having to admit that handling it was beyond them. The story he told had many possible shapes. Perhaps it was that the timing was wrong, that he was not ready, that there were things he needed to sort out in himself before he could show up the way you deserved. Perhaps it was that the connection was too intense, too demanding, requiring more of him than he felt equipped to give. Perhaps it was simply that he convinced himself you would be fine, that you were strong enough to absorb his absence without lasting damage, that the door would remain open indefinitely because doors between people who genuinely connected always do. Right, I know this story in the comments. If you have watched a man convince himself that leaving was wisdom rather than fear. The story is collapsing now. Stories built on convenient half-truths always do eventually, because reality is not interested in accommodating the narratives we construct to make our avoidance comfortable. Reality simply continues to be what it is, to present evidence that contradicts the story, to insist, quietly at first and then with increasing force, that what we told ourselves was not the full truth, and we know it, and the evidence reality has been presenting to him is accumulating beyond his ability to dismiss. He sees the life you are building without him, not dramatically, not as some grand performance of moving on designed to make a point, but simply as the natural continuation of a person who took her pain seriously enough to work through it rather than around it, who chose to grow in the direction of her own wholeness rather than waiting in suspension for a resolution that was entirely in his hands to offer. And watching that, watching you become more fully yourself in the space his absence created, has done something to him that nothing else could. It has made the loss real in a way it was not real before. Because as long as he could imagine you waiting, suspended in the same uncertain limbo he had placed you in, he could maintain the comfortable illusion that nothing was truly final, that his options remained open, that the choice was still his to make on his own timeline. That illusion is gone now, and what has replaced it is something Peterson would recognize as the beginning of genuine reckoning, the moment when a man can no longer postpone the confrontation with the truth of what he has done and what it has cost, and who he has revealed himself to be through the choices he made when love asked more of him than he was prepared to give. Understand what is happening inside him right now, in the private theater of his mind, where the performance he maintains for the rest of the world is finally allowed to drop. He is replaying things. This is what men do when they have lost something that mattered more than they admitted. They return to the footage of it, running specific moments through their memory with a vividness that suggests the mind is trying to extract something it missed the first time, some understanding it did not have access to when it was living inside the experience rather than looking back at it from the distance of loss. He is replaying the moments when you showed him who you were, the specific ways you loved him that he did not fully receive at the time because he was too defended, too busy managing his own internal responses to your presence, to actually be present with you. The conversations where you were honest with him, in a way that cost you something, where you made yourself genuinely vulnerable and trusted him with what you found there, and he responded with a distance that he told himself was thoughtfulness, but that you experienced correctly as withdrawal. The ordinary moments, the Tuesday evenings and the Sunday mornings, and the unremarkable hours between significant events, where the quality of what existed between you was most clearly visible precisely because nothing dramatic was happening, because it was just two people being real with each other in the unguarded space of daily life. He did not know how rare that was when he had it. This is the painful truth at the center of what he is realizing, the understanding that is arriving with the force and the devastation of something obvious that somehow managed to remain hidden until it was too late to act on it. He did not know because he had never had it before in quite that form, and therefore had no reference point for its value. He had had relationships. He had had connection, companionship, the comfort of another person's consistent presence. But what you brought was different in a way he felt but could not articulate, different in a way that made him uncomfortable, precisely because it was, calling to something in him that he had spent years learning not to answer. Peterson speaks with great seriousness about the danger of the man who refuses to grow up, not in the superficial sense of the man who avoids practical responsibility, but in the deeper sense of the man who refuses the call to become more than he currently is, who encounters something that would require genuine expansion of his capacity and retreats from it, who mistakes his comfort zone for his identity and defends it against anything that would require him to become larger. This man has been that man, not because he is bad, but because becoming larger is genuinely terrifying, because the self that would be required to receive what you were offering is a self he had not yet built and did not know how to build and was not sure he had the materials for. But here is what Peterson also says, and what this man is beginning to understand through the particular education of loss, that the refusal to grow is not a stable position. You cannot refuse the call to become more and simply remain where you are. You either grow toward what life is asking of you, or you diminish away from it. And the diminishment is not dramatic or sudden. It is the slow, quiet, almost imperceptible process of a man becoming less than he could have been, less than he sensed he could have been in the presence of someone who saw something in him worth believing in, less than the version of himself that flickered into visibility in his best moments with you, and then retreated when the cost of sustaining it seemed too high. He is feeling that diminishment now, not as a philosophical concept, but as a daily physical reality, the sense of being smaller in his own life than he wants to be, less than what the moment requires of him, living in a version of himself that fits too loosely because it was built to accommodate the absence of something that should have been present. He is feeling it, and he cannot entirely suppress the knowledge of what produced it. The shadow is what Peterson, drawing from Jung, calls the repository of everything we have deemed unacceptable about ourselves and therefore refuse to acknowledge. The parts of us that need, that fear, that cannot maintain the performance of strength and self-sufficiency and emotional invulnerability that we have decided constitutes the version of ourselves worth presenting to the world. Every man carries a shadow, and the shadow of this man contains, among other things, the full extent of what he felt for you, feelings he judged as dangerous, as evidence of a need he was not supposed to have, as vulnerabilities that would make him susceptible to exactly the kind of pain he had organized his entire emotional life around avoiding. He pushed those feelings into the shadow, not because he did not have them, but because having them frightened him, because feeling that much for another person meant that another person held a kind of power over his inner life that contradicted every story he told himself about who he was and how he operated. Because the love, and it was love, whatever vocabulary he used or avoided to describe it, arrived with a dependency he had no framework for accepting, a need for your specific presence that could not be rationalized away or sublimated into something more manageable. Into the shadow it went, and with it went the possibility of actually receiving what you were offering, of showing up with the full weight of his own feeling as a counterpart to yours, of building something that could have been genuinely mutual and genuinely sustaining, rather than the lopsided arrangement his fear produced. The shadow work that is happening now, and it is happening whether he would use that language for it or not, is the slow, painful process of retrieving what he pushed down there, of sitting with the feelings he suppressed and allowing them to be what they are without immediately converting them into something more tolerable, of letting the grief be grief and the longing be longing and the love be love, without the armoring that kept him from being fully present with you when presence was still possible. Peterson says that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. He called what happened between you fate. He called it timing. He called it incompatibility or circumstance or the particular demands of a life that had no room for what was being asked of it. He called it everything except what it actually was, which was fear operating from beneath the level of his conscious awareness and making choices he would not have consciously made if he had been able to see them clearly. The shadow is becoming conscious now, and what he finds there, looking at it with the honesty that loss has finally made unavoidable, is the full weight of what he suppressed and what that suppression cost both of you. There are signs, not the mystical variety, though those arrive too in the particular language of a mind that is restructuring itself around a new understanding. The practical, observable human signs of a man undergoing a genuine reckoning. The way his conversation has shifted in recent weeks. Less performance, less of the confident self-presentation that was always partly armor, more of a searching quality, as though he is working something out that he cannot yet articulate even to himself. The way certain subjects produce in him a stillness that was not there before, a pause where previously there would have been a quick deflection, as though the question has reached somewhere that the deflection can no longer protect. The way he has stopped moving at quite the same frantic pace. Men who are running from something move fast. They fill every available hour with activity, with obligation, with the noise of a life that leaves no quiet spaces in which the truth could get a word in. And the slowing down, when it comes, when exhaustion or circumstance or the simple accumulation of what has been suppressed finally demands it, is visible to those paying attention. He is slowing down. Not collapsing, not falling apart in any way that he would permit to be seen, but settling into a quietness that suggests the running has become more costly than the standing still. The way he talks about you when your name surfaces in conversation. There is a quality to it that was not there before, a care in the choosing of words, a particular attention to how you are described that is different from the casual dismissiveness that men use to signal to themselves and others that a thing is finished, and they are fine. He is not fine, and the people closest to him, the ones paying genuine attention, can feel the difference between his words and his truth in those moments. Right, I see these signs in the comments if you recognize this man. What he is realizing is arriving in layers. This is how real understanding comes, not as a single, sudden revelation, but as a deepening series of recognitions, each one going further than the last. Each one revealing a level of truth that was obscured until the layer above it was cleared away. The first layer is the practical recognition that he misses you, that your absence from his daily life has produced a specific and persistent deficit that nothing else has filled. This layer arrives early, and he has been managing it, mostly successfully, with the standard mechanisms of avoidance and forward momentum. The second layer is the recognition that what he misses is not simply your presence, but what your presence produced in him, a version of himself he could not access alone, a quality of aliveness and honesty and genuine engagement that existed in the specific field created by the two of you together, and that he has not found replicated anywhere else. This layer is more difficult to manage because it cannot be addressed by finding a replacement for you. It can only be addressed by confronting the fact that the thing he is missing was not incidental to the relationship but central to it, and that walking away from the relationship meant walking away from access to that version of himself. The third layer, the one he is arriving at now, the one that is producing the quality of stillness and searching you may have noticed in him, is the recognition of what his fear cost. Not just what it cost him in the practical sense of losing something valuable, but what it cost you. What you absorbed of his unavailability, his retreat, his inability to meet the full reality of what existed between you with anything other than distance and deflection, what it meant for you to offer yourself honestly to someone who could not receive that offering and instead turned it into something you were made to feel was too much, the recognition that his protection of himself came at a direct cost to you, that his refusal to be vulnerable required your vulnerability to be somehow contained or managed rather than honored, that the imbalance he created was not neutral, but was experienced by you as a specific kind of harm. That layer of recognition is what produces genuine accountability, not just regret, which is ultimately still about the self, about the loss the person feels, about what they wish they had done differently for their own sake, but accountability, which requires turning fully toward the other person's experience and witnessing it clearly without deflection, without the self-protective desire to soften what you see with the context of your own intentions. Peterson draws a sharp distinction between the man who merely regrets and the man who takes responsibility. Regret is passive. It is the experience of wishing things had been different, of mourning the outcome without fully engaging with the choices that produced it. A man can regret losing you while still fundamentally believing that his choices were understandable given who he was, still protecting the core narrative of himself as someone who did the best he could with what he had. Responsibility requires something harder. It requires standing fully in the causality. I made these choices. These choices produced these consequences. These consequences affected this person in these specific ways, and I am the author of all of that regardless of the circumstances that surrounded my choices or the pain that motivated them. He is moving from regret toward responsibility. It is not a comfortable movement. It requires him to release the self-exonerating narrative that his fear was understandable and that therefore what it produced was in some sense excusable. To sit with the understanding that you did not deserve what his fear produced, regardless of how genuine or deep-seated that fear was, that the quality of his wound does not transfer its cost to you, that you were a person who showed up honestly and who deserved to be met with equal honesty, and that the fact that he was not yet capable of that does not retroactively justify the impact of his incapacity on your experience of the connection. This is hard knowledge. It is the kind of knowledge that a man with a strong self-protective instinct will fight against for as long as he possibly can, because fully accepting it means accepting that he caused harm that he cannot undo, that there is a debt in this accounting that cannot be paid simply by feeling bad about it. But it is also the kind of knowledge that, once genuinely accepted, produces the only kind of change that is actually durable, the change that comes from seeing clearly rather than from feeling pressured, from genuine understanding rather than from the desire to restore a status quo that his own choices disrupted. What happens next depends on what he does with this recognition, and this is where Peterson's framework is most relevant and most demanding. Understanding something is not sufficient. Understanding is only the beginning of the work. The work is what you do with the understanding, how you allow it to reorganize your behavior, your choices, the actual pattern of how you show up in your life and in your relationships with other people. A man who has genuinely reckoned with what his fear cost you and done nothing differently with that reckoning has not actually changed. He has simply added a more honest layer to his self-understanding without allowing that honesty to alter the fundamental pattern that produced the harm in the first place. If he is genuinely changing, and the signs suggest that something real is happening in him, something more than the temporary remorse that fades once the emotional intensity of loss diminishes, it will be visible not in what he says, but in what he does. Not in the grand gesture, though the grand gesture may come, but in the small repeated choices that constitute the actual texture of a person's character over time. The willingness to remain present when presence is uncomfortable rather than retreating to the distance that felt like safety. The capacity to speak honestly when silence would be easier, to acknowledge difficulty when performing ease would be less costly, to stay in the uncertainty of genuine intimacy without reaching for the control mechanisms that protected him at your expense. He is not there yet. The work is still in progress, but the direction of the work is genuine, and the intention behind it has shifted in a way that was not true before. He is no longer working to become someone who can maintain his current life more comfortably. He is working to become someone who can show up for the kind of connection that your presence made him understand was possible, and that he now understands he had and failed to receive with the fullness it deserved. You are not required to wait for that work to complete itself. This is crucial, and it is the thing that the romantic narrative of these realizations always glosses over in its pull toward reunion. His reckoning is his responsibility, not yours. The work he is doing on himself is work he should have been doing regardless of you. Work that is about becoming who he is capable of being, rather than about earning a specific outcome with a specific person. The fact that losing you catalyzed the work does not make the work about you. And your own life, your own healing, your own continuing development as a person who knows her worth and lives accordingly, that does not pause to accommodate the pace of his becoming. You are allowed to have moved, to have built something real in the space his absence created, to have developed a relationship with your own clarity and your own strength that does not require his recognition or his return to feel valid. The version of you that exists now on the other side of what happened between you is not the version that was waiting for him to figure out what he had. That version did her grieving and her growing and arrived somewhere new. And that arrival is yours, entirely independent of anything he chooses to do with his own reckoning. You are allowed to receive his reckoning with compassion without receiving it as an obligation, to understand what he is going through, to even feel something for the difficulty of the honest self-confrontation he is undertaking, without converting that understanding into a responsibility to make his journey easier by giving him what he is perhaps realizing he wants. Compassion and openness are different things. You can hold him with warmth in your understanding while also holding firm on the question of what you are available for and what you are not. You are allowed to decide that the reckoning came too late, that the person you were when you loved him is not the person you are now, and that the growth you have done has moved you to a place where what he is offering, even a genuinely transformed version of what he is offering, does not map onto where your life is going. Some chapters close, not because love was not real or growth is not genuine, but because the story that comes next requires the space that reopening this particular door would occupy. Honoring that is not hardness. It is the responsible stewardship of your own life, and you are allowed to remain open, to decide that the man who has done this work, who has sat with the shadow of who he was and come back carrying something more honest, is worth the patience of watching that honesty prove itself over time. Not in the single moment of his reckoning, however real it is, but in the sustained pattern of his choices across the ordinary days when nothing dramatic is requiring him to be his best self, and he shows up as that self anyway. Peterson says that love is not a feeling but a commitment to the continued development of another person. If he has arrived at the place where he can actually make that commitment, not as a performance or a strategy, but as a genuine orientation of his will, then what could be built between you from that foundation is different in kind from what existed before, more durable, more honest, more genuinely chosen by both of you, with full knowledge of what choosing means and what it costs. Both responses are the right response if they come from truth rather than fear. That is the only criterion that matters in the end, not what produces the most comfortable outcome or the most romantic story or the reunion that the people watching your story from the outside have been hoping for, but what is true, what your body knows when you are quiet enough to listen to it, what the version of you that has done her own work through this period understands about where she is and what she needs and what she is genuinely available for. Peterson's deepest conviction is that the world is better when individuals tell the truth, not the convenient truth or the therapeutic truth or the truth that makes everyone around them comfortable, but the real truth, the one that costs something to say and requires courage to live by. You have earned access to your own truth through everything you went through in his absence. You know things now that you did not know when this began, about yourself, about what you need, about the difference between love that asks you to be less and love that asks you to be more, about the specific ways that genuine intimacy feels different from the performance of intimacy, about what you will accept and what you will not, and why the difference matters. That knowledge is yours. It was purchased at real cost, and whatever you do with the realization that is happening in him, whether you receive it or hold your distance, whether you open the door or keep it closed, whether the next chapter of your story includes him or moves forward without him, let it be the knowledge that guides you, rather than the longing, the history, the familiarity, or the romantic pull of the story you once imagined you were living together. He is realizing what he lost. That realization is real, and it is significant, and it is producing genuine change in a man who needed to change. But a realization, however genuine, is only the beginning of the story it might tell. The rest of that story depends on what he does with it across the ordinary days ahead. And your role in that story, whether you are the person who receives what he builds from his reckoning, or the person whose existence in his past catalyzed a growth that goes on to serve a future you are not part of, that is entirely, completely, courageously yours to decide. Peterson says that to have character is to know who you are when no one is watching, when nothing external is requiring you to show up as your best self, when the easy choice and the right choice have diverged, and only your own integrity is there to enforce the distinction. You have character. You have demonstrated it throughout everything that has passed between you. Trust it now. Trust the clarity it has given you. Trust that what it tells you about what comes next is more reliable than any of the noise, his, the world's, the romantic story's insistence on how this should end. The answer is already inside you. It has been there all along, waiting for the moment when the noise was quiet enough and you were strong enough to hear it clearly. That moment is now, and whatever it says, the courage to live by it, that is, in the end, everything.